Hello and welcome to the Danielle Newnham Podcast, where I interview tech founders and innovators to learn the inspiring human stories behind their game-changing work. Today's guest is founder and venture capitalist Brett Martin, who I first started following 10 years ago when we were both in the mobile space. When I say following, I'm just going to caveat that means following on Twitter, not actually stalking. Brett is currently co-founder of Kumospace and co-founder of Charge Ventures. Kumospace is a venture-backed virtual office space platform that provides immersive and interactive virtual spaces for hosting team meetings as well as social gatherings. Charge Ventures is a venture capital firm based in New York that invests in pre-seed to seed early-stage tech startups. In this episode of the podcast, we discuss Brett's first taste of business as a kid, what lessons he learned about entrepreneurship from sailing 6,000 miles on a 50-year-old 30-foot sailboat, which involved dodging water spouts, pirates, and drug runners, what it felt like to shut down his first proper startup, and what he looks for in the founders he invests in now. Apologies that this is a shorter than normal episode, but Brett and I spent some time catching up before we started recording. So we did go on for a bit, so I apologise for that, but I will have to get him back on a show another time. Anyway, I must say this was a fun episode with someone who's done it all. So please enjoy my conversation with Brett Martin. Thank you so much for joining me today. I always like to start my interviews by asking about people's childhoods. I think it gives context to who they are as a person. So I wanted to ask you, what were you like growing up? And what would you say were some experiences that shaped you?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here. I love waking up and digging into my early childhood demons before breakfast. Um, I grew up in a small town called Ocean City, Maryland, which is a mid-Atlantic beach resort. So an interesting combination of a 7,000 person village for 9 months of the year, and then 500,000 people in and out every week in the summer. And I like to think that sort of helped me, have very close friends and long-standing relationships, but then also try to, be pretty facile with meeting new people, and also love to get quickly to their stories and try to get intimate with people as quickly as possible. And I actually think if you look at all the technology I've built over my career, it's always about how do you use technology to connect with someone more authentically than you might have been able to before. And I attribute that almost directly to, growing up on the boardwalk in Ocean City, Maryland.
I've heard you say before on another podcast that it's a tiny town, but it was kind of full of entrepreneurs because you all had to be entrepreneurial. Like you said, it was a small place, but then obviously you had all this footfall during the summer months. It's so interesting to hear. Also, I know I heard you say on another podcast as well about how you and your sister, well, I think you were if it was an actual business, she worked for you up until a point that your parents said, okay, I think, there needs to be a bit of fair ownership here. But yeah, a young age into entrepreneurship, it's great. And then you went to study economics and psychology at Dartmouth, which obviously, as a founder and investor, which you are, that's kind of like, to me, it's a winning combination. Did you know when you studied that what you wanted to do afterwards?
So much of what we do is reshaped in the rearview mirror to draw a
Mm,
through line through our actions. But I do think, the the truth of the matter is that I started off in physics, and then I don't think I was smart enough to get straight A's in physics without showing up for class or doing the homework. And I moved into psychology because there was a natural curiosity, people and what makes them tick and why they do what they do. And then I think my senior year, I realized that I wasn't sure if I was going to get a job with a psychology degree. So what I actually did was I went to the registrar my senior fall, and I changed all of every one of my courses for senior year to economics, which was just enough
mhm.
to to get a degree. And my whole plan was to then do corporate recruiting, get a job at a bank, and then I could change them back. But
Mm.
what turned out was I actually really liked economics, and so I just ended up doing a double course load of economics my senior year, and getting a major in that.
I see. And then was it at university that you won a business competition? Is that right?
Yeah, yes. Well, I think it just goes to, I tend to like the cheat codes. If I can find a shorter path between A and B, I'll generally take it, unless I'm actually, there for the journey. Um, and so, yeah, we did business plan competition at Tuck. That's the business school at Dartmouth, and we came up with this idea for a collapsible snowboard, and yeah, we won as undergraduates, and then we got to take some entrepreneurship classes there. We actually built a prototype for a in-game video game advertising at Tuck, and too bad I didn't pursue that because a few years later, this company called Massive sold to Microsoft for $300 million. We probably
Mm.
should have dropped out and pursued that one.
So what year was that when you came up with that idea?
That would have been 2002. I think Massive sold in to Microsoft. I want to say 2006, 2007.
You're always ahead of the game with this stuff. So you ended up graduating, then you worked in finance in New York. Then you decided to, I don't, did you buy this sailboat and sail 6,000 miles? What's the story behind the boat?
Well, actually, so the plan again, I think investment banking was a means to an end, and so the plan had always been to go and make money and make sure there was no debt and then travel. And so I in 2006 I got my second bonus. I quit my job and I said, okay, friends, let's go travel the world as per plan. And my friends at the time said, Brett, we're 23 years old, we're working on Wall Street, it's a bull market. We're making $250,000 a year, and why don't you go to hell? And so I unfortunately found myself with no one to travel with, but I did have one buddy who had went down to Biloxi, Mississippi. We had just had this big hurricane called Katrina in the U.S. and had really wrecked some of the cities on our southern coast. And he was down there doing hurricane cleanup, and he didn't have anything to do, so his family had a 50-year-old sailboat, and we said, well, we could probably fix this up and take it for a spin, and that was the beginning of our voyage.
But you know what? When I heard that story, I thought, oh, that sounds wonderful. It sounds so idyllic and like what a great, time out from entrepreneurship. But I don't think it was as easy going as that. Obviously, the fact that you were sailing 6,000 miles, it can't be that easy. But didn't you come across a few near death experiences, or am I imagining that?
Well, the I would characterize sailing as n- you know it's a 30-foot boat, so it's a nine meter boat, and the speed of a sailboat is actually determined by its length in the water, and so 9 meters is not very long, and so therefore this boat did not go very fast. So if you could imagine sailing 6,000 miles at a top speed of 6 knots, 6 miles per hour, but and also never in a straight line. For someone who likes to get between A and B very quickly, we never really accomplished that on the sailboat. So it was 99% utter boredom, and then about 1% sheer terror in the form of water spouts, pirates, drug runners, hurricanes, and trying not to get smashed up against the rock. So, yeah, sailing, that's how I would describe it.
Do you know what? It's like an analogy for entrepreneurship, isn't it? Like there's kind of 90% maybe things aren't happening as you'd wish, and then like another percentage near death experiences, but you made it back. When you came back, what was your plan? What did you want to do?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it is a great analogy because so much of entrepreneurship, it, especially with brilliant journalists like you. I think entrepreneurship has been glamorized, and entrepreneurs are now put up on pedestals, and we all want to be Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, but it is 99% kind of sheer grind. People ask me
Mm.
what I'm up to, and I'm making very small tweaks to the product and our go to market motion. And then occasionally, you have big exits. So I do think that's a great analogy.
So when you came back, what did you think you were going to do? Because I've heard you say before, I think, was that when you found things a bit difficult, like you came back and you weren't sure what direction to go in?
Oh wow, you really did do your research here.
I do,
This is
yes.
the the, the times of troubles. Yeah, so I came back from sailing, and actually it wasn't quite after I went and did a Fulbright scholarship in University of Bocconi at Milan right after for a year, and I did some research on. Uh, actually, I started studying the fashion and the textile industries, and then quickly pivoted out of that once I realized that was kind of a dead end for my career. And the my vanity as a 24-year-old wanting to spend time in Milan with models was
Mhm.
quickly came to an end. And I pivoted into tech. So I actually used Skype, which was advanced technology at the time in 2006, to interview American CEO founders of publicly traded companies and the VCs that invested in them. And that was really great. I met a bunch of great people. I really solidified my goal to get into tech. And it was great. We published in Harvard Business Review, and I thought I was going to come back and immediately get a job. And I came back to New York, and I got a bunch of interviews very quickly. And then I interviewed, and I remember I had 11 interviews at this one particular venture capital firm in New York. And I could not understand why they wouldn't give me a job. And then I realized the great financial crisis was beginning, and no, it was 2007, 2008, and no one was hiring. So it was my first understanding of market conditions and how they might impact
Mhm.
career prospects. So I did have a dark year where I didn't get there, and that was actually what pushed me to a startup, because I couldn't get another job. So I grabbed my smartest buddy from Dartmouth, and we moved to Austin, Texas, and I would say it was our first startup, but really it was I would say startup zero, really more of a prolonged coding experiment than a startup.
What was that started? Because the sonar was your second one, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. This was, I would say, a failure to launch. I learned some valuable things. I learned that, you know, one, my good buddy that I did it with is a great guy. We're still close friends, but we weren't particularly the most compatible co-founders. So I learned, you need to find people that are really you work well with. And two, I learned that writing code does not a startup make. You actually have to
Mhm.
get the code in people's hands and make sure that's what they actually want. But I did learn a lot about computers. Actually, that's how we picked up, we were writing Ruby on Rails at the time. People don't really use that anymore, but it was a great learning how to build something with your hands. And it got me excited enough to come back to New York and start the real startup.
And with Sonar, what can you explain for those that don't know? Because I think when you set up Sonar was when I first kind of heard about you. Can you explain to those that don't know what it was and what led to you launching it?
Well, you referenced me being earlier in the podcast, and I think Sonar is a great example of being too early. Um, you know, Sonar, I think, as a first company, was that pure type of startup where I think a founder does try to express themselves, you know, through their startup. The startup is an extension of themselves, and to some extent, an embodiment. Was an embodiment of my ideals. The iPhone had just come out, and the App Store had just come out, and the last big thing in tech was, you know, Facebook, and the next big thing was the iPhone. And so everyone thought that, the smashing together of the two of them in the form of what we called social, local, mobile, solo mo, or, proximity based social networks was what they called Sonar. And it was an app that would basically tell you how you were connected to the people nearby. And, from my naive, idealistic state, I love people, and I was always curious about people, as we've discussed. And I said, well, why not use technology to help me connect with the people that are near me? And so that was what Sonar did. It pulled all the information about people and told you who was in the room with you.
What was fantastic about it is because I think Foursquare was around then, wasn't it? Am I right in thinking Foursquare was around?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was a very different time. Back then, I think there was a uh, idealism to everyone. Honestly, in tech, tech was still kind of a small cottage industry, and everyone was spewing their location all over the
Mhm.
internet around 2009, 2010, 2011.
We were also optimistic and innocent, and I remember because even with Foursquare, people because we didn't use it so much over here in the UK, but I would see on Twitter everyone like sharing their location from Foursquare to Twitter, And, that's just what people did. But you're right. Like when I look back at it now, it's something now that everyone would be complaining about, like sharing your location and the risk of stalking. But really, it was such a clever idea. And like you said, it was ahead of its time. Unfortunately, after raising money and giving it a good go and having millions of users, you did shut down the business. And you wrote a fantastic post mortem where you said startups don't die when they run out of money, they die when their founders let go. I ultimately stepped away from Sonar when I came to the conclusion that despite all that we had invested, everyone stood a better chance starting anew. It's difficult to accept, but sometimes you have to concede a battle to win the war. So I wanted to ask you, because there's lots of founders that listen to the podcast, how hard was it to close down and what lessons did you learn from doing so?
Uh, yes, well, it's funny. I just bought a book by a British author. I can't remember his name. It's called On Giving Up. So, still exploring, you know, when to let go of things so that you can move faster.
Mm.
Um, I think, I mean, I learned several painful lessons. That probably the most important one from there is, on partnerships again. I think, we had a sort of a different challenge. We come out of an incubator and the truth was that I actually never owned more than 20% of that company, even though, I came up with the idea and founded it and, brought in my early co-founder, uh, because the incubator that I had started it out of that I had worked for previously, owned the majority of it. And that, um, kind of lopsided, I would say, cap table, really did not set the company up for success. There was always sort of a tension between the incubator and then the, West Coast VCs that I had brought in. And, I think I bridled against that, but I actually did never could pull it off, restructuring it. And actually, when I went to go raise and we had pivoted the Sonar after the kind of proximity-based social networking space had frozen off like the ninth circle of hell. We pivoted the app into kind of a contextual um, targeting platform, and not quite ad tech, but basically an SDK that would enable other apps to leverage the contextual understanding of the user that Sonar had, which I actually still think to this day was not a bad idea. But when we went to go raise a new round, the new investors who are actually now still close friends of mine, and they're the Bold Start guys. They actually did Kumospace, my current company, but they said, "Hey, Brett, you have to go and clean up this cap table, or else we can't invest in this." And ultimately, I fell short there. And for a while, I was pretty salty about it. And I think I was pointing fingers and blame. And what I ultimately came to realize is that, hey, you're the founder. You chose these partners, and you either have to make it work, or you have to restructure the partnership, or you need to leave. And I think you have to act on that quickly and not spend much time there. And I look and you see the most common cause for startups dying is actually founder disagreements. And my advice there is, sort of make it work, change it, or get out of there. But if you're not doing any of those three, then get moving.
Yeah, it's good advice. Also, it was very common back at that time for people to join accelerators. It was happening over in London a lot. And founders who hadn't worked in the tech industry before, or just general kind of first time founders, I could see a lot of them giving away a lot, especially those that start up in universities out of kind of research units. They give so much away at the start because they're just so happy to have some investment, like someone believe in them. But I think now people are a bit more astute and realize that actually giving away a lot, at the beginning is possibly a recipe for disaster. But it's a great advice. So you founded Sonar, you then left. I know you've set up now Kumospace, but in between there's obviously venture capital world drew you in, and I know you'd had experience of it earlier on, but you started your own VC in 2015, Charge VC. Can you tell what type of startups you're interested in? Like what areas of tech are you focused on?
Yeah, so we're a New York-based pre-seed, seed stage venture capital fund, and we jokingly say at your first round of capital, you'll raise from friends, family, and fools, and charge ventures. That we're looking for that type of silly early stage risk. That's because doing it with my partner Chris Hibachi, and we're both founders. We've both taken companies from 0 to 1 multiple times, and so it's surprising, even though venture capital as an industry has grown by billions and billions of dollars since I first got into tech in 2008, and there's billions of dollars deployed in New York City alone every year. You'd be surprised. It's still hard to get that first half a million, $1 million check, especially unless you worked at a fancy tech company. If you worked at Uber, you worked at LinkedIn, you worked at Google, of course you can raise money. If you sold your last company for $100 million, of course you can raise money. If you were close with a bunch of venture capitalists, you can raise money. But that actually still leaves most people out in the cold, and there's very few institutional firms that will take a risk on a first time entrepreneur. And that's the void that we hope to fill. So we focus on that, and we do consumer, prosumer, and product-led growth software. We really focus on creator economy and SMB businesses. Again, it's all this love for the pure craft of entrepreneurship. And we think influencers are the new kind of entrepreneurs, the new SMBs, and we love to invest in companies that facilitate that.
Fantastic. I've always said, actually, because a few years ago, in 2015, I set up, I don't have it anymore, but a company that was all about kind of empowerment of women and getting more women into tech. And I saw that there was this rise in, I guess, I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but I think we used to call them mummy influencers, like mum influencers. And there was just women who were sharing their kind of life on Instagram. And they had so much stock. Like, we, at the same time, we were selling T-shirts, which had like empowering messages on. And I remember like a Hollywood actress wearing our T-shirt, and we put it up on
Mm.
Instagram. And, and pop stars as well. And we put it up on Instagram, and like no one would buy it. Then when we had these kind of mum influencers, oh my, we'd sell out. And it was just really interesting that influencers were really overlooked. It's like anything, I guess, but you can see this trend. And, then you find out actually they've got a lot of stock, like how they influence their audience is akin, like you said, to an entrepreneur. So I think it's fascinating. As you said, you kind of invest in pre-seed. So if a founder was to approach you, what do they have to have ready in order to meet with you? Because pre-seed is obviously so early. Is it just they come to you with an idea, proven experience? Forget the pitch deck. I always think that's a waste of time. But do they need to have something ready to show you?
Yeah. So, because we invest so early, we really are focused on the founders themselves. And so we have a number of kind of what we consider to be successful archetypes for founders. And so, one is the serial entrepreneur. And we, at this point, having been in tech for 20 years here, we're friends with plenty of them. And if one of our longtime associates is starting something new and they sold their last company for $100 million, then yes, of course, we'll invest in that. We're not too proud to take that opportunity. The, the, there's nothing unique about that. The second is someone that has a secret, basically, someone that has some sort of deep domain expertise that they've learned or earned over years of study. And often that it is someone who is worked deep in an industry and became a leader in their industry, and then solve how things could be fixed and is starting a company. But it doesn't have to be, and it could actually be. We have a lot of these autodidacts who, I'm thinking of a particular entrepreneur. Her name's Frida Poli. She started and sold a company in the HR analytics space, and now she's going deep on longevity. And I had a breakfast with her months back, and she taught me so much about longevity in the human body just in 45 minutes breakfast. I said, okay, wow, this is the type of person that we love to invest in, because she's going to know more about longevity in a few months than people who have spent their entire lives in the space. So that's the second type, and then the third type is that first time founder. But what we're looking for in first time founder, or someone maybe who doesn't come from the same pedigree, is the fact that they've already moved the chains. They've gotten the ball rolling. They have gotten some traction going. They've got some users. They've got some early sales, and they've done it by hook or by crook, by cobbling together whatever resources, or building it themselves, right? So the bar is a bit higher for first time entrepreneurs, but you would be surprised. These truly scrappy folks are getting things done with virtually nothing. And so that proves to us that with a little bit of money that they could go a long way.
Absolutely. As a founder, as well as a VC, I think it's great. There's so many VCs out there that haven't got that background and, might have just come from the financial industry. And I always think they're a different kettle of fish to those that have done it themselves. Like if I was to take investment, I absolutely would want to take it from someone that's kind of been in the trenches. So you set up Kumospace in the pandemic, November 2020. Can you tell what it is and where you think the future of work is going? Because obviously it's tied into it.
Yeah, so Kumospace is what we call a virtual office where remote and distributed teams show up to work. Really, it's kind of an all-in-one communications and productivity suite for teams that are distributed. So imagine it's like Zoom and Slack and Loom and all kind of thrown together, and so you have everything you need. So it's not, you might think to yourself, well, this sounds kind of like what's that called, Microsoft Teams, and to some extent, we are a suite of communication tools, but we like to think of ourselves as the anti-teams teams, a place where
Mhm.
you can get work done, but it's in a more humane way. And, you as a employee, you can, have a degree of self-expression, but you can have all the benefits of remote work, the flexibility and the freedom, but also the productivity of showing up in the office. So that's the dream of Kumo Space.
And do you see, because I think when you started in the pandemic, it was obviously very clear that it was needed. But then there were so many people that were predicting we'd all go straight back to work as soon as we could. And, I'm grateful for the fact that that hasn't worked out. Do you think this trend of us working from home or working remotely is just going to increase as time goes on?
Well, given that commercial real estate in the U.S. is still at 50% occupancy here in 2024, I would say the remote work is
Mhm.
definitely still a thing. Um, I think the dominant design uh, for a lot of folks is hybrid. While they still have their office space, they're trying to get use out of it. But I can tell you that companies are shedding more office space than they're adding right now. And I look at remote work as uh, one of these long secular mega trends, like e-commerce, right? Like it spiked during the pandemic and then it, came back down, but it came back down to a higher level and it continues to increase. And so my belief in that trend is predicated on a very strong belief in the internet. I think that anything that can be done on the internet will be done on the internet. We started off thinking it was crazy to sell books online, and now we sell cars and houses. So
Mhm.
the fact that I think we can do most of our knowledge work with nothing more than a laptop, then it will be done on laptops from anywhere in the world. I think the big challenge for Kumo Space is convincing folks that good enough is not good enough. Just because you can do work on Zoom doesn't mean it actually is the best tool for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Two more questions. One thing that I found quite striking was you were being interviewed, and I don't know if you were in a therapy session or on a retreat, but basically it was somewhere where you ended up, I think you described it as bawling your eyes out. And apparently it was due to the stress of during the pandemic, you were making calls to founders, and obviously it was a very difficult time. And then obviously when you went on this retreat stroke therapy session, it all came out. I wanted to ask you, because I don't know how many investors would make those calls during that time. I know some would obviously drop in and check founders were okay, but why was it important for you to do that?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think I said that it's almost a trope to be a VC and be stressed out about your portfolio because it's honestly so much less stressful than actually running a company. But I will say, yeah, we invest in founders when they're just getting off the ground, and for many of them, we have the fortune of watching them grow into big, important entrepreneurs running large companies with thousands of employees. Um, and just this hold witness to the stress that so many of them were under in 2022, 2023, when the markets were changing and people had to act quickly and do riffs. And our founders care deeply about their employees, and so letting them go was not easy often in any ways. And just trying to hold a space for those folks. At this point we've got 80 portfolio companies, and I can assure you I was you know talking to more than one distressed founder over the course of the year. And yeah, I guess I didn't fully appreciate how much of that stress I was, carrying myself. When I look at, as a venture capitalist, the thing you're supposed to do is you're supposed to stack rank your portfolio by most likely to succeed and least likely to succeed, and then throw away the bottom 75%. That's the rational choice. And I think if you work at a big bulge bracket, blue chip venture capital fund with billions of dollars, that's what they do. It's just business, as they say. But for us in charge, it is personal. We care about these people, and also we're entrepreneurs, so we don't like to give up on. And I will say that the redeeming thing that we learned in that process is that you have your companies that are ripping, and the sky's the limit, and they're making tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in ARR, and then you have your what some people would call your dogs, which really never get off the ground. And what we learned in that process is that those tides can change, and your companies that were, printing money can go out of business in a snap of fingers. And the companies that weren't going anywhere can, take a slight pivot and find a business model, and it can't try to be lucrative business model and take off. And so what we learned was to never give up. And if people don't want to give up, we're not going to give up on that.
That's so good to hear. And like I said earlier, I think that is the difference between a VC that has been a founder themselves, that like you said, it's more personal. Okay, final question, which I ask everyone. We're going full circle. If you could go back in time to maybe a difficult time, whether it's when you were a child or in 2008 when you said things were tough, what's one piece of advice that you would offer a younger Brett?
I would say that, don't wait for the data to come back to believe in yourself. I think an error I made as a venture capitalist was, I always thought I would be pretty decent at it. And, but I said, we don't know. And, it took me 6 years and, returning my capital for my first fund to look at in the mirror and say, oh, actually, I didn't do such a bad job of this. I actually am, I think I'm pretty decent at it. And, the problem was that I wasted 6 years waiting for the numbers to come back. And I, that 6 years, I could have been being more aggressive, and, I could have been building that whole time. And so I think a lot of young people, they, might want the validation of the market, to believe in themselves, and that you're just going to waste your time doing that. So I would say, hey, for doing it, you might as well believe in yourself. You may or may not be right, but you're going to waste a lot of time otherwise. So, don't wait for the world to tell you that you're great.
Great advice. Thank you so much for your time today, Brett. I really enjoyed talking to you.
It was my pleasure. It was so great to connect after all these years, and I hope to speak again soon.
Thank you so much for listening to my episode with Brett Martin, and thank you to Brett for coming on the podcast to discuss his founder investor journey and all the lessons he's learned. Apologies again for it being a slightly shorter than usual episode, but hopefully you found some great lessons from Brett and his entrepreneurial journey. As always, I want to leave you with a quote, and today it is actually from Brett himself, from a post that he wrote 7 years ago entitled Scar Tissue, which I will link to in the show notes. And it's where he reflects on shutting down Sonar, his mobile startup. He says, "Choosing to be a serial entrepreneur is signing up for a bumpy ride. You will become bipolar if you insist on tying your personal self-worth to your startup's latest victory or setback. If you want to take a big swing without relinquishing your sanity, I suggest you accept that the journey is the reward."